everyone hear me? Okay, very good. We are about to get started. I see a lot of interesting names like Genius Kid. I wonder who that is. Everyone, for this lesson today, we are going to be doing a series of exercises together. So please have a pencil and a piece of paper that you can write some variation and moves down on. Because as I said, this isn't just going to be a lot of me talking, it's also going to be some of you doing. Okay? So today we plan on going over endgame calculation, basics, and schematic thinking. So, yeah. Okay, so let's start with the simplest example, which is counting. I remember I had a friend a long time ago at the US Amateur Team West tournament in 2013 who lost a king and pawn endgame because he, for whatever reason, did not know how to count moves. So white's king in this position is more active than the black king. So you have a choice of which side or which pawn you want to take. Because this pawn is closer, a lot of people would just go after that pawn without thinking and not consider what the opponent can do. Now, to evaluate this position properly, one must simply count how many moves it takes each side to make a queen. So let's take a look at this one together. So if this king goes after this pawn, it will take us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 moves to make a queen. So keep that in mind, 7 moves. And if it were black to move, it would take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 moves to make a queen. So what do you guys think the evaluation of that variation is? Atharva, it is a draw, absolutely. But now let's say we go after this pawn, which seems a little bit further away. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So keep in mind it takes 8 moves to promote that pawn, and it takes black 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 moves to promote that pawn. So when all is said and done, black's king is going to be on the yellow square, white's king is going to be on the green square, and when you have your queen, this pawn will have just made it the second rank. So for those of you who are tuning in to the previous lesson, I shared how to win or which queen versus pawn endgames were winning and which ones were drawn. And because this is a knight pawn, without even thinking any further, you know that you can win that. So if we want to put this on the board now and see it into action, when the pawns push, so white gets the queen and then the pawn pushes forward. White actually has a very clean move here he can play that will end black's hopes and dreams all in one move. What would that move be? Saket. Queen to h7, or yes, queen to g6 also works as well, where you are simply going to play queen to b1 on your next move and blockade that pawn forever and ever. So going back, keep in mind when you're calculating pawn races, count how many squares it takes each player to make a queen. So now let's take a look at the next example. So it is black to move here. This is a game that happened at a Friday night tournament. where somehow black was totally winning, and he still kind of is, but white's king managed to get into a very intimidating position. Black to move can win this game, but because he made a lot of inaccuracies earlier on, it's going to be a little bit harder. In order for black to win, he needs to somehow mobilize his king side 4-on-3 pawn majority, make a passed pawn. If he can somehow do this, then he can participate in some kind of pawn race battle. Otherwise, the king is just going to come over here, double up these pawns, and promote. So I want you guys to take a minute to think about this and write down on your piece of paper what your plan would be and why. It is black to move. Okay, so any thoughts? Let's hear it. Raise your hand if you feel like you have something to say. Okay, looks like we have a hand. So Safkrith, what do you think? You are unmuted.
King to e7.
So what's your idea, buddy?
To protect my pawns and maybe invade the f3 and h3 pawns.
Okay, keep going. Yeah, sorry.
That's pretty much it.
Okay, so calculate that move with me. So you play king to e7. What if I play king to c5?
King to f7.
Okay, and what if I play king to b6?
King g6.
Okay, king takes a6.
You win my pawns first, so it doesn't work.
Okay. Anyone else? Atharva? King to c5. King to b6. Pawn takes pawn check. King takes a6. King takes b5. Pawn a4. Pawn a5. a6. a7. And a8 equals queen with check. How do you evaluate that position? I wouldn't say it's winning, but I would say it's probably a draw. So let's go over Atharva's variation here. So after king e7, king c5, and king e6, after king b6, pawn here takes and takes, we have a pawn race situation. So it takes white 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 moves to make a queen. It takes black 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves to make a queen. It's white's move, number one. Number two, white will promote the queen with check. So white will be able to use his queen to make threats first. So when you look at that, the evaluation of this position definitely is not a clear win for black. It looks like we have another hand raised here. So we're going to take another one. Safkrith?
No, it's the same hand raised from before.
Okay, sorry. Shresh. Okay, so what is your idea? Ooh, so what if g takes h5? Okay. If you play f5 right now, what if I move my king back from c5 to d5? King e6. Okay. Interesting. I can go h6 and chase your king to the corner. I like your idea, Shresh, but I want you to understand something. After king e7, king c5, and h5 here, you are giving your opponent an outside pass pawn that is going to take your king forever to stop, right? But one thing I really did like about what Shresh just said is that he wants to mobilize his other pawns to make a passed pawn. So the idea is definitely not bad, but we do need to execute this just a little bit better. So after king e7, king c5, can anyone find a better move to speed up our ability to make a passed pawn so we can win the pawn race? Jinmo. That is correct. f5 is the best move here. And there are two critical variations you need to calculate. The first one is after pawn takes and pawn h5, the idea being you want to play g4, deflect this pawn away so you can push that other pawn forward, is the race. So it takes your opponent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 moves to make a queen. And it takes black how many moves to make his queen? 1, 2, 3, 4. And if takes, it would be 2, 3, 4, 5. So at least we are 3 moves faster than white. So is that a winning plan? Absolutely. So white's only try, which you should also see in advance, is what if the king goes back? So who can tell me what would happen if the king goes back? Let's see. Saket. King f6, very good. And when the king goes to e4, what move would you play, Saket? That's right. And here, white is in Zugzwang. So after h4, the king will have to move. And after king takes pawn, now our king is in the intimidating position. And black remains a pawn up. So to solve this study, you need to recognize that you need to mobilize your 4-on-3 pawn majority to make a passed pawn. So even though this king is in a really powerful position, you have to calculate ways you can push the agenda a bit faster, even if it means giving up one of your pawns. And the f pawn is much safer to give up because when he takes, your king is already in position to defend against it. If you push the h pawn instead, the problem was your king is not really in a great position to defend this, and it will have to go completely out of its way to stop that pawn. Yeah. Yeah, and then I said king d5. And I think that was the problem. Okay. So we are going to now move on to the next exercise. So this one is hopefully quite simple. I want everyone to write down their solution. I'm only going to give you guys about 30 seconds for this one. You are white. If you feel like you know the solution, go ahead and put the hand raised mark, or I'll call on someone here. Christos. Okay, keep. That is correct. So right here, it's a simple calculation. We take on f6 with check. After the queen takes back, we trade all of the pieces and win the b6 pawn. And after rook takes f6 and king takes, when the b pawn pushes, this king is out of the square. Make sense? Very good. So that one was a bit easy, maybe too easy. Let's move on. So this is a tournament game that I played in 2014. My opponent had just played this move, rook to d2. I want you guys to take a minute to think about whether or not it's a good decision to trade rooks. Because my opponent made an offer to me. And if I can win the king and pawn endgame, I definitely want to trade rooks. But if I cannot win the king and pawn endgame, I may not want to. Yes. So we had a no. Okay, we are actually going to take a class vote all together to see how many yeses and how many nos we have. So if you're participating from online, if you have a vote, please put your thumb up or your thumb down. Okay, yes, thumb up if you want to trade rooks, thumb down if you do not want to trade rooks. I'm going to be looking at everyone's responses. I'm going to allow this person to speak, or there is a hand. Hello? Who's this?
How do you thumbs up?
I'm not actually sure. Oh, this one? Yeah. There's nothing there. This one, that's this thing. If you can't put your thumb up, don't worry too much about it. But you should record your answer on your sheet of paper. Okay.
You say vote for yes, and then people raise their hands, and then you count.
Sure, I think that's a good idea. Let's vote yes. Raise your hand if you think it's a yes. Okay, and don't raise your hand if you think it's a no for trading rooks. Thank you. So if you think you should trade rooks, raise your hand. If you don't think you should trade rooks, please keep your hand down. I will be closing the votes in about 30 seconds here. So should black trade rooks or should he not? Yes or no? All right, so put up your votes. If you're in the class, please put your thumb up or your thumb down. So from both the live stream and the in class, we have two, or actually just one person who thinks we should trade rooks. So the answer is yes, we should trade rooks. The king and pawn endgame is won. Well done, Atharva, for seeing that. So in the game, I did trade rooks. I will tell you what I saw. After rook takes d2, king takes d2, king takes d5, and if king to d3, then I played the move f6 actually. And what I had seen here was when he takes and I take back, if he plays king to e4, after king takes f6, I remain up a pawn with a clear plan to advance my pawns forward. So I felt like my opponent's only try would have been participate in some kind of pawn race. So I would have to count how many moves it would take both players to make a queen. It's white to move. It would take him 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 moves to make a queen. And it takes me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 moves to make mine. I was able to queen before my opponent and win the queen versus pawns endgame. So just food for thought, pawn endgames must be calculated very exactly. So for those of you who felt like you made your decisions really quickly, that is a really poor mentality to have in a tournament game, because a single detail or a single miss in a king and pawn endgame could be the end or could completely change the result. So keep that in mind. So we are now going to move on to doing a few more studies on pawn endings. So tonight or tomorrow, when I send the files to you guys, I will be sending some studies for you guys to do for homework. And what I want you guys to be doing with these studies is writing down as many and all the variations you see. If you only wrote 2 or 3 things or 2 or 3 moves, you probably didn't do the study enough justice, okay? Because some of them are very deep and complicated and do require quite a bit of thought. So we are going to dive in to another one of these studies. So it is white to move here. If you see the main idea, it is quite simple, but if you don't, it can be quite challenging. So I want you guys again to take a minute or two to see if you guys can figure this one out. If you need more time, just let me know. White to move. See one person's hand raised. Hello, did you have a comment, a question?
Is it king b4?
Keep thinking. Okay, I'm not gonna say right or wrong just yet, but keep thinking. Again, we don't wanna make 2-second answers when we are doing our king and pawn endgame calculation. Okay, we're going to have Saket share his answer with us. So Saket, after b4, what did you see? Like, let's say black plays f5 in response. f4, f3, f2, f1, queen takes, king g5, and very good. So what Saket found was this move, pawn to b4, and he managed to calculate enough to justify his response. Okay, let's see. So after b4, f5, b5, f4, b6, f3, b7, f2, queen, and queen, and Saket found this move, queen b5 check, in advance. And after queen takes, king takes, we have the move king to g4, and after a4, h5, what you're going to see is because the pawns are promoting on opposite corners, the side who promotes first is going to win. But when black plays the move king to g3, white can simply place the queen on h1 and stop the king from advancing. So back here, somebody mentioned the move king to b4. I believe the problem with that is I can push my c pawn down the chessboard. So would you like to share what you saw? Okay, what's up? Okay, and if I keep pushing, keep going. Okay, and if I push again, and if I play king here, okay, and let's say I start running my h-pawn. Okay, and if I keep pushing here, okay, and I keep going, then I think you're gonna lose because you cannot stop my pawn. Right? Okay, so we have a comment from somebody. Whoops. Did you have something to say?
Before a4.
Before a4. Okay, let's go back. Yeah.
What if b4 instead?
What if b4 instead? Does it make a difference if I keep going?
Not really.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think you're stopping the pawn is the right strategy here. It looks like black is just a bit too fast. So pawn to b4 needs to be calculated from the start. And the thing I like about it is it's very forcing. So whether it works or not, you will be able to determine that right away based on looking at candidate moves for both sides. And I want to give full credit here again to Saket for seeing this move, queen b5 in advance. It is really easy in your head to stop evaluating this position, to evaluate this position and say, okay, this is a draw and that's done. But the better players will go the extra mile and look at all of the active moves, even at this moment. So well done. Okay, so now let's take a look at this position right here. So this one's a little bit more challenging than the last one. So I'm going to give you guys about 5 or so minutes to come up with this one. If your brain is already hurting, I don't blame you. But this will be the last study for today that we will do as a class before we move on to our next order of the day. So I'm going to give a few more minutes to some of you guys before we raise our hands again. So I'm going to give you guys about 2 more minutes before I take any hands. Okay, so I see quite a few hands raised. So I'm going to start calling on people. So Aaron, I'm going to unmute you here just right now. So what do you think?
Queen takes e6. So
And
d takes e6, king g2.
Okay, and is that all you saw, or did you see more?
Like e5 and then a4.
And then e4.
So a5.
So if I continue just pushing my pawn, you probably realize you're going to mate me. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So what if I play there bishop to g1? So for those of you who haven't followed this yet, we have queen takes queen, pawn takes, king to g2, pawn to d5, pawn to a4, pawn to
The pawn's on the e5.
pawn to e5, pawn to a4, pawn to e4, pawn to a5, and I play bishop to g1. So what would you do in that case?
King takes g1.
Okay, and what if I play the move pawn to e3 at that moment?
King f1.
Very good. And it's important that you see that in advance in order to solve this study. So the king can watch over both of those pawns. If you keep advancing, the point of bishop to g1 was to deflect the king back to the back row so I can promote my own pawn with check. So let's see this all together. So after queen takes e6, pawn takes e6, king to g2 is very necessary to stop the bishop from coming back to g1. And after e5, a4, e4, a5, if black continues pushing, then what ends up happening is white promotes with checkmate coming up very soon. So what I tried here just now was this bishop to g1 move. The idea here is if white does nothing and continues pushing, I actually get to save my bishop, which means I am actually going to be up a piece because my bishop is useful and active. So after bishop to g1, white will have to take. And after e3, it is important not to get lazy and play the move a6 because you saw it in an earlier variation, because after e2, e1 is going to be coming with check. So good move here, playing king to f1. One other cute variation, I don't know if any of you guys saw, is this move pawn to h5, which I thought was pretty interesting as well. The idea of pawn to h5 is after pawn h4 and pawn push, after check, is it a thumbs up or a thumbs down idea to take that pawn? So from the audience here at Chess for Life, people are saying it is definitely a thumbs down decision because this bishop can come back and come into the game. So what should we do at this moment here? Atharva. Very good. King h1, which keeps the king in view of the g1 square. So the pawn can continue pushing. So I'm going to take a couple more hands to see what else anyone might have. So, okay, let's see. So Ethan, I'm going to unmute you. What do you think? Or did you want to say anything? No? Okay, that's fine. All right. And Sathkrith?
Queen.
Sorry, what was that?
Queen a8 is what I was thinking, but
then I play queen to g8. Am I correct?
queen g8. Well, you're in check.
Queen
Yeah.
g8?
Yeah, and then I saw that. I didn't see that before.
Okay.
So,
No problem. Okay. Anyone else? Let's see. I don't know who pi 3.14159265535 is, but I was about to call on him. Okay. Siddhant, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, so after queen to a8, and then the queen blocks on g8,
Sure.
I'm thinking that we can take queen takes on g8, and then king to g2.
And king to g2. But this is a very different scenario after king to g2, because after I play this move king to f7, when a4 is played, my king can get into the promotion square. which means my king can stop it. Like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a very good thing to know. Can the king actually stop the pawn? Yes or no? Thank you. Okay. And we will now continue. So we are going to move on to schematic thinking. So we've done a lot of work in calculating just now. We've done a lot of work in calculating just now. Now we are going to move to how to properly place our pieces based on a plan. And that is with the theme of schematic thinking. So right here, white to move wants to defend this position because black has 2 passed pawns and the bishop against just the rook. So as white, what do you guys think would be the easiest defense? Okay, I have a hand. Joe, go ahead and talk. What do you think?
Yeah, I think rook d2, maybe.
Okay, so if rook to d2, what would you do if I played bishop to e5?
Maybe, yeah, just rook e2, or.
Okay, and if you
Oh
play.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, and then you play rook b2. So, in that case, rook a2.
And then I would play bishop to b2.
Yeah.
So how do you like that position of your rook?
Yeah, it's locked up. I'm probably gonna lose that position.
Okay.
Or actually, yeah, that is losing.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of trouble with your rook unable to move like that. Because my bishop is also on the same color as my promotion square. So if you thought, Joe, that you could somehow save this king and pawn endgame, unfortunately, it wouldn't be the case because after check and here, only at the right moment can I move the bishop away to promote and give me.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
There's a lot of ways to go wrong here if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Let's see, Jinmo. Okay, and what if I play bishop to e5? And if I play, what if I play bishop to b2? Although, I think I could just play a2 as well, right? Then I just promote, yeah. Yeah, I think so. So after rook d2, bishop e5, if you play rook d3, I can just play a2 because this is defended. So defending this position is definitely harder than quite a few people thought. Ethan, I'm going to unmute you if you had something you wanted to say here. Okay, see, is it letting me unmute you? Okay.
Oh, I don't have anything to say.
Sorry, what was that?
I don't have anything to say.
Oh, okay, no, that's fine.
Still
Don't worry.
thinking.
That's okay. Keep going. All right. A draw. So we have pi. Is this Alex?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think?
King G2.
King G2. So what is your idea?
To not let his G pawn go forwards.
That's correct. So in this position, well, okay, that's part of it, but that is definitely not all of it. Sorry. What we need to understand here as a group is, what is Black's plan to win if you do nothing? So if, let's say, your king and rook would just sit, what would Black do if you just decided to move your rook back, or your king back and forth, or your rook back and forth? What would he do? Atharva. King and pawn endgame? What do you mean? Okay. So I'm asking right now, what do you do if, as Black, to win if White does nothing? Okay. Let's see. Shresh. G3. Okay. So you want to push this all the way to G2 and check the king away. Is that okay? That's not a bad idea, as long as this king cannot just come to G2, A, and B, this rook is not defending that G2 square. Yeah. Right. So right. So in order for Black to win, he needs to drag this king all the way here to attack the rook, because this bishop cannot leave this diagonal as long as that rook is putting pressure on the pawn. If you try bishop e5 prematurely, it would always be met with rook takes a3. So this, yes, sure. So the general gist here is this king wants to come all the way to b3 to bully that rook away, so he can finally advance that pawn forward. But there is a flaw in Black's plan. What do you think that is? So let's say this king were to walk over here. If our king was close enough, what could we do? Jinmo. Right. So if we started with this move, king to g2, and Black were to start moving the king, what White could do is simply move the rook back and forth. The idea here is when this king strays too far from either pawn, then White could take on a3, give up his rook so he can get the other pawn as well and promote. Or not promote and make a draw. Questions, Jinmo? Sure. I'm White to move. Okay. It was white to move, yeah, because we were at, yeah, this is the position. Okay, and I move. Okay. Yes. Sure. Well, white will play king to g2 first, and you mean he goes g3? And so let's say I go rook a1. So eventually, this king is going to be in a position where he cannot defend this pawn. And this bishop right now is an overworked piece, right? So if I take this and you take, I'm going to take that. So that's the idea. So when I use schematic thinking for both colors, I'm thinking as black, I need to get my king over here in order to win. That's going to take me a lot of moves, right? And as white, if I'm defending, I want to think about, okay, if this is my opponent's plan to win, what can I do to hold this? And the key point of stopping this plan is understanding that when the king strays too far, when he is on his journey, and when he is not influencing either pawn, you can sacrifice your rook and go after the other one. So it's recognizing both tactics and where the pieces belong at the same time. So there's this guy named Unknown Person. We are going to unmute. Hello.
What? Wait, oh, I didn't know that you were my hand. That was my last time.
Okay. All right. So we are going to unmute Joe. Joe, did you have anything?
No, I didn't. That
Okay.
was from last time.
Thank you. So we are going to mute, unmute Alex. Alex, did you have something?
No.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next one. So in this position, it is black to move. Because we are a little bit short on time here, I am just going to explain the process here. So black realized that this pawn on d6 is overextended, and he wants to be able to win that pawn. But there's a catch. He wants to be able to win that pawn without allowing his opponent to get counterplay. So the best way to do that is to move the king. Just simply gobble up the pawn, because this rook is in an optimal position where he is putting pressure on the a pawn and keeping white's rook away from getting counterplay himself. In the game, I embarrassingly played the move rook to d3. And the problem with this, even though I am going to be taking my opponent's pawn, is that my opponent can play rook to c1 and get rook activity. After rook takes d6, rook to c7, you can see it is harder for my king to get into the game. I have to defend this pawn. When I chose to defend it like this, you can definitely see the difference in rook activity. Unfortunately here, I only managed to draw the game. But had I have thought schematically a little bit better and played the move king e8, if my opponent tried to push the pawn to allow his rook some freedom, I would simply be able to go after that pawn. And if he tried to defend it, I have a few different ways to make progress. I can use my rook to attack his queenside pawns when his rook is no longer defending, or I could even play rook to c6, simply gobble up that pawn with my rook, while at the same time stopping my opponent from getting counterplay. So we are now going to move on to the next example. So let's take a look at this position. I want you all to write down what black and white both have going for them. So what it is that, what advantages both sides have, and what black's strategy will be to improve his position. So think about schematic thinking here. Black to move. Where do you think your pieces belong and why? And ultimately, what is your plan? So if you're having trouble finding where to start, answer these 3 questions. Number 1, what is your goal in the position? So how is black going to make progress? He needs to find a way to make a threat. In an endgame, that is either by making a passed pawn or by picking off some of your opponent's pawns. So, and number 2 is, where do your pieces belong to achieve either one of those said goals? And the third step is, of course, how are you going to get your pieces there, which involves some calculation. So take some time to write out your response. Okay, it looks like we have a hand, so going to unmute unanimous. So go ahead.
Black has an extra pawn and he's gonna go b5 next turn. And white controls the d file.
Okay, so he's gonna go b5. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah.
b5. Is this the move, the green arrow on the board, b5?
Yeah.
So why did you want to play b5?
So that if he takes with the knight, I can take his e4 pawn and then try to push my e pawns.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. But did you consider the possibility that you might also part ways with your a7 pawn very shortly too?
Not really.
But there's a few things that are going on. So when you play b5, after knight takes b5 and knight takes e4, it is true your majority on the king side is more mobile. But there are a few things wrong, I feel, with this move. The first one is, if your opponent simply plays a move like rook to e2, you might lose your e4 pawn. But more scary is the fact that your opponent already has a passed pawn that is ready to go. And I don't think it's quite worth giving your opponent that kind of counterplay, just so you can take this e4 pawn. Black in the game actually thought of this e4 pawn as a potential long-term weakness that he eventually got around to taking, but without allowing that same kind of counterplay over here. Good thought. Yes. So you want to play a6, then b5. So keep in mind that Black not only has one advantage, he has two advantages. He has more space on the queen side, but he also has control over the d file. Am I correct? So if you play a move like pawn to a6, is there a possibility that I can simply go after that pawn? Yes or no? Okay. I was also considering moves like rook e6 at some point as well. So, Shresh. Right. So do you think that trading rooks would benefit your opponent or benefit you? Mm-hmm. Okay. So Shresh mentioned that he wanted to exchange both sets of rooks. I don't know exactly how I feel about that, because white has this 3-on-2 pawn majority. I feel right now is not mobile because black has one of his rooks guarding this advance of c5. So right now, one of the reasons why white cannot play pawn to b4 is because his c4 pawn hangs. If you trade off both rooks, I believe your opponent is going to be able to mobilize that outside queen pawn majority. Any other thoughts? Yeah. G5. So this is something that you eventually want to do. Play G5, then H5, and potentially get a passed pawn of your own. Is that your idea? Very good. So Smyslov in the game, who I believe was playing black, decided to trade one set of rooks. And the reason why he decided to trade one set of rooks is because he wanted to stop these rooks from getting into the black position by putting a king on e7. A king on e7 against just one rook will forever defend any threat of invasion, which will mean that this knight may be able to do other things other than simply guard d7. But he didn't want to trade both sets of rooks, because if he traded both sets of rooks, then there is a possibility that this queenside pawn majority could mobilize itself. So after rook f to d8 and rook a to d1, black captured on d2 and white simply captured back, and black continued with the move king f8. I see some hands coming up, so I'm going to go ahead and answer them. So I don't know who unanimous is. Hello?
I didn't raise my hand.
Okay. All right. So Mislav wanted to trade one set of rooks. And you're going to see his plan was to put his king to e7. Once this king was optimally placed, only then did he think about advancing those pawns. It's very tempting to want to advance the pawns as soon as you can, but when you do that, you are making big commitments and possible weaknesses your opponent can exploit. And you want to make sure that your own pieces are in position to defend them, just in case. So now black played the move h5 because he wanted to play the move g4 and or g5 and possibly g4 or h4. He did not play the move g5 because what would white do in that case? Let's see, Krish. He could play g4 and possibly shut all the counterplay on the king side down. Yeah, Shresh. It is possible. And I don't think that's a bad strategy. But I think Black's strategy was a little bit different because he wanted to find a way to provoke this f-pawn from moving, so he could attack the e4 pawn weakness. Or he wanted to make a passed pawn, which would force this rook to defend against it. So in the game, Black did play the move pawn to h5. And white played king e3 to activate his king, and black continued with his strategy and played pawn to g5. So after pawn to g5, black played the move rook h2. So what black is trying to do is now stop this pawn from becoming a passed pawn. And here, Smyslov played his secondary idea, which was to weaken this e4 pawn by way of g4. So he first played rook d8, take control of that d file that white had previously worked so hard to take control over. And soon he is going to play that move g4 so he can weaken this pawn and put his rook on d4 where he can attack it. So after rook h1, simply keeping an eye on this pawn, black played the move g4. And his idea was again very straightforward. After takes and knight takes, he wanted to simply move his rook to d4 where he could pressure the pawn. He moved the knight back to keep his h5 pawn defended, and he put his rook on d4. I thought the way Smyslov A chose how he wanted to trade pieces and B improved his pieces slowly showed why his technique was so good. So there is a hand. What do you have to say?
White have to take, like, when you play g4, does white have to take? Can he f4?
So the question was, when g4 was played, do you have to take? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, can you go back?
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go back. Yup. So does white have to take? So sorry, what was that?
Can white play like f4?
Can white play f4? That is a good question. So I don't think so, because I think black would be very happy to get rid of these doubled pawns and make not one, but two passers on the queen side like this.
Or maybe king takes instead of pawn takes.
And if king takes, then I would be very excited to maybe move my rook into action. I believe this move is actually, and could be even threatening things like rook f3. So I don't believe either of those alternatives are better than what happened in the game for white, because I feel like the king is in a worse position here, and I was able to invade successfully on the d3 square. And in this case, black has two passed pawns that he can just start pushing to victory for. And it's not really clear what else white really got in exchange, other than stopping this rook from coming to d4. Thank you for asking, though. So that is why he decided in the game to take. So after knight takes check, king e2 and knight f6, black keeps the h5 pawn defended and also keeps an eye on the e4 pawn. And white played the move king to e3. Black played rook to d4 to continue putting some pressure. So now when black's pieces were tied down to defend, or white's pieces, excuse me, were tied down to defending, now black is trying to look for ways to advance his king. So that king that was keeping a watchful eye over d7, d6, and d8 previously is now going to be used to reroute, get into the action. And when all was said and done, white tried some tricky plays on the queen side, but black managed to snitch the e4 pawn and emerge victorious. I thought here what white actually tried was kind of cute. After knight to c8, if black just gets careless with pawn e5, he gets checkmated, which is a little bit funny. But in the game, white did not fall for such a trick and played pawn to d3 check, which simply pushes the issue of getting his pawn promoted. And here, white actually resigned. I thought that Smyslov's play was quite amazing from the start. He understood, first of all, it would benefit him to trade just one set of rooks, which is why he played the move rook f to d8. And white, of course, is not going to want to let the d file go to waste, which is why he is going to contest it. And after rook takes, instead of just impatiently pushing his pawns before his king was ready, he moved his king to the center first. And only when the king achieved his optimal position and his rook was defending against any kind of queenside counterplay his opponent might try, only then did black start pushing his own plan to either make some weaknesses or get a pass pawn on the king side. So when the rook was diverted, rook came back to the center, and Smyslov was able to create meaningful weaknesses and improve his pieces to test them. So chess players, I apologize, we went a bit over time today. So we are going to end our class here, but the two things that we are going to be working on for homework is calculating endgames, especially those pawn endgames all the way through to the end, and learning how to strategize in the endgame through the means of schematic thinking. First, understanding what your goal is, how do you make progress, or how do you stop your opponent from making progress? And number two, where do your pieces belong to achieve those set goals? And number three, how are you going to get your pieces there? So I'm going to be sending you guys some exercises to work on this. And the next time we meet, expect a quiz. But it's not going to be a quiz where I'm going to be giving you the similar questions that I've been giving you for training and homework, but it's going to be something different. You're going to get new positions that you haven't seen before that you are going to have to try and solve. Okay. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I appreciate that everyone was able to make it here on last minute notice, and I will see you all next time. Thank you. Okay.